fiery horse with the speed of light, a cloud of dust, and a hearty Hi-Yo Silver, the Lone Ranger. With his faithful Indian companion Tonto, the daring and resourceful masked rider of the plains led the fight for law and order in the early western United States. Nowhere in the pages of history can one find a greater champion of justice. Return with us now to those thrilling days of yesteryear. From out of the past come the thundering hoofbeats of the great horse Silver. The Lone Ranger rides again.
Come on, Silver! Let's go, big fellow! I'll Silver! Away!
The Lone Ranger and his Indian companion Tonto rode the trail toward the town of Rockton, accompanied by the Lone Ranger's 14-year-old nephew, Dan Reed. As they rode, Dan broke the silence by asking,
"Is the leader of the outlaw gang you're hunting really a woman, sir?"
Yes, Dan, but no one knows who she is.
Them say her talk like Mexican.
That's right. She has a Spanish accent, I understand. Also, I've heard she's quite young, perhaps 20 or 22.
Gosh, that isn't so young.
You not think so now, Dan, but someday you think it young.
That's right, Tonto. The last hold-up of that girl and her gang happened in Rockton. They robbed the bank there last week.
Ah, them say girl wear white mask. Lead gang in many hold-ups. Bother ranchers plenty. Stampede herds. Poison water holes sometimes.
I know. They're a menace to the entire territory. All the ranchers west of the Pecos are worried. Some of the smaller ranch owners have been forced to leave.
Golly, you wouldn't think a girl could cause all that trouble.
But she has, and unless she and her gang are stopped, many more ranchers may be forced to give up. Let's find a suitable place to camp. Come on, Silver.
Get 'em up,
Come on, Victor.
Later that day, after a campsite had been found in the hills about a mile from Rockton, Dan Reed and Tonto went to town for supplies. They stopped at the hitch rack in front of the store.
Oh, Scout.
Oh, Victor, oh, boy, ho.
Dan, you take List into store and wait. Me go to blacksmith shop and have him fix loose shoe and Scout.
All right, Tonto, steady, boy. I'll wait in the store for you.
Get 'em up, Scout.
And now, is there anything more, Miss Johnson?
No, that's all. Get the order together and my brother will call for it shortly.
Yes, ma'am.
The girl at the counter turned quickly to leave, bumping into Dan Reed, who had stopped beside her.
Hey, excuse me, madam.
Why don't you keep out of the way, boy?
Gosh, you turned so quickly. I'm
well,
sorry.
Don't stand there blabbing. Move.
Golly, ma'am, you don't have to shove me.
Then stay out of my way.
Gosh, she's sort of mean for such a nice-looking girl.
Yep, she sure is. Fact is, I never have seen Jane Johnson smile even once in all the time she's been coming here.
Does she live here in town?
No, she and her brother bought a small ranch a few miles south here. Reckon they've had the Bar J now about 6 months all told.
Oh, they're newcomers then.
Yeah, reckon you can call them that. She's sort of odd for a girl so young. She bosses the ranch and won't have anything to do with cattle. Won't have them on the place. They raise and sell horses at the Bar J.
Oh, I see. I don't want to run into her very often.
Run into her is right.
Oh, I didn't mean it that way exactly. Yeah. Here's a list of supplies I want to get, sir.
All right, son. Have them for you in a jiffy, yes, sir.
After making his purchases, Dan waited for some time in the store where he had promised to meet Tonto. While he waited, a young man entered.
Here comes Phil Johnson, brother of the girl who shoved you a while ago.
He doesn't look very friendly either.
You got the stuff ready my sister ordered?
Sure have. It's all there on the end of the counter.
Thanks.
As Phil Johnson picked up the various packages, Dan Reed's attention was attracted to Phil's left hand, on which the index finger was missing. Phil noticed the boy staring and spoke sharply.
Button, what are you staring at?
Oh, I didn't mean to stare, Mr. Johnson. It was only... Well, I noticed your hand.
I don't like snoopy kids. By the way, how come you know my name?
Well, now, I reckon the boy heard me say, "Here comes Phil Johnson," when you come in.
That's right.
Oh. Well, get out of my way. Let me get this stuff out of here.
Son, seems like you have a knack for getting in the way of people named Johnson.
Golly, those Johnsons are two people I don't want to meet very often.
Dan, you come now.
Yeah, all right, Tonto.
Goodbye, son. Come in again.
Bye, sir.
Later at their camp, Dan told the Lone Ranger about the Johnson girl and her brother.
From what you've told us, Dan, the Johnsons seem to be unfriendly.
The storekeeper said the Johnson girl never smiles at all. He said she and her brother have a ranch they bought about 6 months ago.
I see.
It's called the Bar J, and it's a few miles south of town. He said the girl bosses a ranch and that they won't have cattle on the place. They raise horses.
I wonder what objection they have to cattle.
That's what I wondered, too. Phil Johnson got real mad when he saw me staring at his hand where a finger was missing.
Some people are sensitive about things like that, Dan. Well, I think Tonto has supper about ready. After we eat, we'll ride to town. It will be dusk by then. Maybe Tonto can pick up some news of the masked woman and her gang.
Meantime, in the ranch house at the Bar J, Jane and Phil Johnson sat at the supper table with their foreman, Tex. Phil was saying,
"The rumpus over the bank robbery in town last week has died down now, Jane. They don't have any idea we had anything to do with it.
If we continue to play things the smart way, they never will.
You got something else in your mind in the way of a job to pull, Phil?
Yeah, Tex. Something I heard about today in town.
Now, look, Phil. We got plenty of cash to last a while. I hear the Circle T spread is fixing to drive a large herd to Pecos. I want to take the boys and stampede that herd.
Well, that sort of thing doesn't get us anything, Jane. I never could savvy why you did things like stampeding cattle and poisoning water holes and all that.
See here, Tex. If you're getting squeamish about what we
don't
do,
go getting
then...
riled up. It's just that I'm curious, that's all, Jane.
Well, reckon it won't do any harm to tell you, Tex. Since you're sort of our right-hand man with this outfit. You see, I'm 4 years older than Phil. He's 21 now.
Yeah, don't seem like 4 years difference between you.
There is, though, Tex.
10 years ago, Tex, the difference was more evident. I was 15 then, and Phil was 11. My father had a sheep ranch up near El Paso. He was a widower, and he brought Phil and me out from Illinois with him.
Sheep were not very well liked out this way.
Yeah, we found that out.
Yeah, we sure did. The cattlemen did everything to drive us out of the territory. Killed our sheep, poisoned our water, and finally burned us out completely.
Gosh, that sure was tough.
My father took us to Pecos. He took our jobs around town to keep us in food. Then, when I was 18, he got sick. Very sick. He made me promise to get back at the cattlemen somehow. Made Phil promise, too.
That's right.
When Phil and I were left alone, I thought up the idea of a gang and of the White Mask. The West took all we had, so Phil and I are taking all we can get from the West. And since the cattle ranchers ruined us, we'll keep on doing everything we can to keep them from getting ahead out here in this territory.
We sure are doing plenty, too, Jane. Nobody ever suspects.
Well, that's because of the mask. Because Jane uses that accent, makes them think she's a Mexican girl.
Si, Senor Tex. The law is hunting for the Mexican woman of the white mask, while all the time the respectable Miss Jane Johnson and her brother on the barge A spread a few miles from Rockton.
Now, look, Jane, I heard about that cattle drive. They start day after tomorrow at dawn.
That's right.
Well, it fits in with the deal I have in mind.
I'm listening. Go ahead.
The express stage is bringing in the payroll for the Rockton Mining Company from Pecos. Now, we could hold up the stage and swing over and interrupt the cattle drive by stampeding the herd. At the same time, that herd will cover up our trail. We won't have to ride for miles to throw the law off our tracks.
Sounds like a doggone good idea to me, Jane.
Well, all right. I'll lead the gang in the holdup, then against the cattle drive. Like Phil said, the cattle will cover our trail after we leave the scene of the stage robbery. Believe me, I'll never let up on those cattlemen. Never.
That evening, the Lone Ranger and Dan Reed waited on the edge of town while Tonto went to the cafe to pick up what news he might hear. Later, Tonto joined them, and they started back to their camp. Tonto was saying,
"You hear the sheriff and posse holler gang after bank robbery. Them ride long way, then lose trail.
I see.
And talk much about how Mexican woman's gang move against ranchers. Men in town not savvy.
It is strange. Gang doesn't steal any of the cattle from what I've heard.
That right. Them ripped down fences stampede herds, cause plenty trouble, but them not to take away cattle.
Maybe the woman and her gang have left here and gone to some other part of the country now.
Could be, Dan, but they seem determined to stay west of the Pecos River. For some reason, they're doing all they can to ruin the ranches in this particular territory. We'll stay around here a few days longer. I'm not convinced yet that they aren't hiding out somewhere near Rockton. Sooner or later, I hope to get a lead that will help us find them. For the good of the Southwest, that gang must be stopped.
The following evening, Tonto arrived in camp after another trip to town.
Oh, Scout. Oh, fella. Easy, Scout. Easy, fella.
Aye. Any more news, Tonto?
Me hear him talk about big cattle drive to Pecos. Them drive big herd from Circle T spread. Them start at dawn tomorrow.
I see. The outlaw gang knows about that cattle drive. It might mean more trouble.
That right?
You think maybe the woman outlaw leader might take her gang to stampede the cattle?
It's possible, Dan. That's the sort of thing they've been up to for some time. Tonto, at dawn, you and I shall follow the drive until they're well on their way. Dan might as well stay right here in camp till we get back.
That's all right with me, sir.
We'll follow them until dusk tomorrow, Dan. Then Tonto and I'll turn back. If that woman and her gang do intend to make trouble, we may be able to prevent it.
The next morning, the Lone Ranger and Tonto left the camp at dawn. Later, Dan Reed mounted his horse Victor and rode leisurely along the main trail away from town. As he rode around a bend in the trail, Dan saw the express stage coming along toward him in the distance.
Here comes the stagecoach from Pecos, Victor.
A moment later, Dan saw a group of outlaws ride from a grove of trees and head for the stage.
Outlaws holding up the stage.
The boy quickly turned Victor to the side behind some boulders.
Come on, Victor. Ho, Victor, ho, boy, ho. Golly, I bet that's the woman with the white mask and her gang. When they leave, I'll follow them and find their hideout, Victor. Then we'll get back to camp and wait until the Lone Ranger comes there. He and Tonto sure will be surprised at the news I have to give them.
The curtain falls on the first act of our Lone Ranger adventure. Before the next exciting scenes, please permit us to pause for just a few moments. Now to continue. Dan Reed, 14-year-old nephew of the Lone Ranger, had watched from hiding as a gang of outlaws held up a stage along the trail. As soon as Dan saw the gang ride away and the stage had headed at breakneck speed past his hiding place along the trail, he urged Victor into a gallop and followed after the gang.
Come on, Victor!
The outlaws had gone back a short distance, then had turned into a side trail, leaving hoof prints that Dan could easily follow. Swinging onto the side trail, Dan raced along. As he topped a rise and approached some large boulders, a bullet whined over his head. And several horsemen quickly appeared from behind the boulders to block his path. Dan pulled to a quick stop as he saw their drawn guns.
Victor, hold on,
The horsemen had bandanas covering the lower part of their faces. And just in front of them was a woman wearing a white mask. Jane Johnson, using the fake accent, spoke first.
So, it is a boy who is trailing us.
Well, boy or not, we can't let him go.
The button will be a nuisance. We'll have to tie him up and take him along. Get off your horse, kid.
Phil quickly tied Dan's hands, then helped him back into the saddle and completed the job, leaving Dan securely tied to Victor. As Phil worked, Dan's eyes widened when he saw that a finger was missing from the outlaw's left hand. Dan looked closely at Phil, then studied the woman leader.
Why are you looking at me like that, boy?
Oh, no reason.
Hey, wait a minute. I've seen this button before. He's been staring at both of us kind of funny.
Hey, where have you seen him before?
At the store day before yesterday. Little fool kept looking at my hand.
You practically told him who you are now.
What of it? I'm sure he knew anyway. He's been following us. That button's too smart. You knew where the Johnsons all the time, didn't you, kid?
I know it now. And that missing finger proves it to me.
We'll head for the valley where the Circle T hands are driving cattle. Bring him along. We'll stampede the cattle, then head for our ranch.
We ought to shoot this smart kid right now, Jane.
No, I have a better way to get rid of him, so it'll look like an accident. Grab his horse's bridle, Phil. Watch the boy until we reach the head of the valley where we'll wait for the cattle drive.
Right.
Now, let's get going. Get up there!
Meantime, the Lone Ranger and Tonto, keeping the herd in view, rode along the ridge of one of the slopes along the valley, out of sight of the cowpokes who were driving the cattle.
Short distance beyond here, Tonto, is the head of the valley.
That's right.
On this side, after they leave the valley, there's a steep cliff, so they'll have to turn the herd to the right to avoid it. The gang rode in from the other side at that point and stampeded the cattle. Many of them would be lost over that cliff.
That would not be good.
Let's hurry and get ahead of the herd so we can investigate. Come on, Phil, there.
Not long after, Jane and her gang arrived in a gully at the head of the valley, where the ridge on the right sloped down to level ground.
Easy there. The herd is still some distance up the valley, but we can hear them coming.
Yeah, they ought to be reaching here in about 10 minutes or less.
And when the leaders of the herd reach this point, we'll let loose and start them stampeding. Make sure they swing to the left. There's a cliff over there.
What about this kid, Jane? You said you had a plan to get rid of him.
Yeah, I have. Get him off his horse right now.
Easy now. All right. All right, Button. I'll get you off that horse.
What are you going to do?
You'll find out. There. Now what, Jane?
Take your lariat, wrap it around his feet, making a lot of loops to hold his feet together. Then tie a loose knot.
A loose knot? Then he'll be able
Do
to
what
get...
I say, Phil. After looping the lariat around his ankles, untie his hands. Tex, help Phil. The herd will soon be here.
Sure.
This rope will hold you, kid.
I'll untie his hands now.
Let me go. You'll be sorry.
No
if
use struggling, Button. There.
His hands are untied, Jane. He could easily unloop that lasso from around his ankles. I don't see why
I want him to be able to unloop it, Tex. But it'll take just enough of his time so he can't run out of the way of the herd. Those cowpokes riding point will be coming around the bend in the valley in a minute. And before they see you, Phil, put the boy on your horse and take him out into the path of the herd.
Come on, kid, up on my horse.
No, I won't.
I'll help you, Phil. You mount, then we'll put him up.
All right. Keep him up here, Tex. Jane's smart. The kid will get the lariat loose from his ankles, but not in time. And later, if the lariat's found, folks will think some cowpoke dropped it. Come on, Tex. Keep him up like I said.
The ruthless woman and her gang watched as Phil rode out and placed Dan on the ground, on a spot where the herd, which they planned to stampede, would soon be trampling underfoot. Phil again untied Dan's hands, then left the boy and rode back to join the others, just as the herd was seen rounding a turn not far away. The gang watched a moment as the herd moved closer, and as Dan worked frantically to untie the rope on his feet.
Even if he gets the cords loose, the kid couldn't make it out of the way now. All right, men, let's get busy stampeding that herd. Get up there.
The Lone Ranger and Tonto arrived at the point across the end of the valley from the gang, just as the outlaw Phil left Dan and rode back into the gully where the gang waited.
Kimasabi, me see fella ride from path of herd and go into gully over yonder.
Yes, Tonto, Look, there's someone sitting on the ground out there.
Me not savvy. Him do something to boots. Him... Look, gang ride from gully. Them try to stampede cattle.
Tonto, that sounds like Dan. Try to turn the herd from the cleft. I'm going out there. Montilde!
The great horse Silver sprang forward like a streak of lightning, heading across toward the figure on the ground in the path of the frenzied herd.
Faster, big fella! Montilde!
The Lone Ranger could now see Dan clearly as the boy finally flung the loosened lariat from his ankles and scrambled to his feet. At the familiar cry, Dan turned and saw the speeding masked man racing toward him. Dan, in panic, started to run toward the speeding Silver.
Stand still, Dan! Stand still!
The Lone Ranger saw the thundering herd closing the distance between them. He knew that the merest slip would be the end, not only for Dan, but perhaps for him and Silver. The intelligent stallion sensed the tense urgency in his master's voice as he heard another ringing cry.
Hurry, Silver! Faster, big fellow!
He saw Dan obey his shouted command and stand still, waiting with arms upraised.
Steady, Dan! Steady!
As he approached the boy, the Lone Ranger leaned to the side, bracing himself. Then, with a scraping movement, he grasped Dan.
Hang on, Dan!
For a few brief seconds, the Lone Ranger thought the boy would slip from his grasp. Then Dan's hands reached the masked man's shoulder, clinging desperately, and Silver raced on with his double load until they were barely clear of the stampeding herd.
Oh, Silver, oh, steady, easy.
I thought I was done for.
Momentarily silent with suppressed emotion, the Lone Ranger put Dan down, then quickly dismounted.
Easy, steady, big fella. Dan, I might not have reached you in time.
Oh, golly, it was awful.
Go over into that grove of trees and wait, Dan. I'm going to find Tonto. When we join you, then you can explain.
Yes, sir.
Easy, steady, big fella. One Silver!
Tonto and the cowpokes from the Circle T spread had managed to turn the herd from the cliff. Meantime, the woman in the white mask and her gang, as soon as they had ridden from the gully and started the stampede, turned up the right slope and disappeared over the ridge without having seen the masked man rescue Dan. The Lone Ranger and Tonto returned to the place where Dan was waiting. Dan had already found Victor, who had broken away from the outlaws, and the boy had brought his horse to the grove. The two men questioned the boy and learned all that had happened.
And you're sure, Dan, that the Johnson girl and her brother were with that gang?
Oh, yes, sir. That's why they wanted to get rid of me, because I said I knew them.
Oh, it mistake to tell them.
Well, that doesn't matter now. I'm sure they didn't see me save Dan, and they'll think they're safe.
Look, Kimasabi.
Yes?
Some of men who were driving cattle coming this way.
Golly, maybe they'll think you're an outlaw because of your mask.
Maybe, but it's too late to try to leave now.
Reach! We got you covered! Don't know why I didn't hightail it with the rest of your gang.
We're not outlaws.
That mask says you are. I don't savvy the boy,
I
but
saw a
I'm
gang hold up the stage a while ago. I followed them, and they brought me here. They left me to be trampled under the herd because I found out who the woman in the white mask is.
This doesn't make sense. By thunder, we're taking the three of you to the sheriff.
The boy told you the truth. I managed to get him out of the path of the stampeding cattle.
Say, I was riding on the left side. I remember seeing an hombre on a big white horse heading across in front of the herd.
Hey, you're right. Maybe so. But how come you and the Indian were out here, mister?
On the chance that the woman and her gang might cause trouble. Here, does this silver bullet mean anything to you?
Let's see that. Oh, it is silver. By thunder, that white stallion. The mask and silver bullets. You must be the Lone Ranger.
That's right.
Great day.
This boy definitely found out that the girl in the white mask is known around town as Jane Johnson.
Jane Johnson of the Bar J spread? But that can't be. The woman outlaw has a Mexican accent.
I heard her talk like that. Then when she found out I knew who she was, she talked like I heard her talk in town. Her brother was with him, too, the man with a finger missing.
We're able to pick up their trail on this side of the valley, and it leads to the Bar J. That will be even more definite proof.
That gang is good at covering the trail.
Well, it may take a little time, but I think Tonto will be able to follow it.
All right, let's get going.
Easy, steady, big fella.
Steady, boy.
One, two,
Later that day, Jane Johnson sat at a desk in the main room of the ranch house at the Bar J. The rest of the gang stood nearby watching as she counted money taken from a canvas pouch on top of the desk.
Well, it looks like we made quite a haul by getting that payroll.
Have plenty of dinero.
With the cash we're taking, we'll soon be rich. I'll never give up moving against the cattlemen until most of the hombres will be afraid to own a ranch west of the Pecos.
That's the spirit, Gene.
Yeah, folks won't soon forget the woman in the white mask.
Yes, they will. Hey, street, all of you.
Hey, a masked hombre, sneak the door open.
Fix him.
No, you won't. Get out.
Gun him down, boys.
Don't be hasty, man.
Hey, look, men with guns at the windows.
Up your guns, all of you.
Hold on. What right have you to come in here
Hey,
and
look,
try to...
the boy. By thunder, they recognize the boy. Well, it all adds up. We trailed them here, and there's the payroll pouch they stole from the stage.
All right, get up, you.
Now, see here, what
I
do you...
said get up. Yes, here's the white mask she wears. You've got the proof you need. The sheriff will be very glad to get this woman and her gang.
He sure will. We'll see that he gets them.
Good. There's no need for us to stay here now. Come, Tonto. Dan.
All right, boys. Round them up and let's take them to town.
Hey, that masked man. Why is he here? Who is he?
I don't have to answer your questions, ma'am, but it'll be a pleasure to tell you about it. Thanks to him, this whole territory will be safe from now on from the insane crimes of you and your dirty gang. You see, he's the Lone Ranger.
This is a feature of the Lone Ranger Incorporated, created by George W. Trendle, produced by Trendle Campbell Enterprises, directed by Charles D. Livingston, and edited by Fran Stryker. The part of the Lone Ranger is played by Brace Beamer.